We will switch to English now, so I think she will speak in English.
Yes.
And so Mia Alvin and Scott Hilier and who is the third one who will join us afterwards? Yeah, José Manuel Menendez. So we will have the roundtable in English this time, and let's get the introduction, what's happening in Europe, and let's learn from best practices in other countries, and then bring all those things together.
Thank you. Yes, my presentation will be more focused on policy making at the EU level. I'm working in the European Commission for convergent media and content units. So we take care of audiovisual policy, I would say in general terms. My team, the team I'm working for, is responsible for the implementation of the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, which is a sector-specific directive covering both traditional TV and new on-demand services, as well as audiovisual commercial communications. The main objective of this directive is the protection of general interest, consumer interest, interest of minors and other vulnerable groups, including interests of people with disabilities. I'm not sure if you are aware that this directive also includes a specific provision addressing the accessibility provision. This provision, Article 7 of the directive, obliges member states to encourage audiovisual media service providers under their jurisdiction to ensure that their services are gradually made accessible to people with visual or hearing disability. It's further, the recital to the directive further specifies that the means to achieve the accessibility are the sign language, subtitling, audio description, and easily understandable menu navigation. Just to give you a timeline of the monitoring activities of how this provision is implemented by the member states. The directive entered into force in 2009, by which time only few member states had the rules in place. We already reported once on the application of this provision. It was in May 2012, and I will shortly describe the results of this reporting obligation. I will tell you what was the state of play in May 2012, and now we are approaching the second reporting period, and we are now about to send again a questionnaire to all the member states to report on how they transpose this provision of how the accessibility services, what is the state of play of accessibility services in each of the member states. Except for the application reports that are prepared every 3 years, the European Commission also prepares specific studies. The last study was published in November 2013. It's a study on assessing and promoting e-accessibility, and this study also provides quite a detailed overview of the different accessibility measures, subtitling, audio description, and sign language in all EU member states and even wider. And another important tool is this public consultation, and such a public consultation, it was called a Green Paper on Convergence, was published last year. And we already have the preliminary results of these public consultations, and 2 of the questions concerned specifically accessibility. I will refer to the questions in my favorite slides, but just to tell you that one of the questions concerned standardization, whether there are further standardization efforts are needed, and the second question concerned incentives, what kind of incentives the EU and the member states should apply to encourage the take-up of accessibility services. I will maybe briefly summarize the conclusions of the first application report of 2012. So it's based on the replies received from all the member states. And the report concluded that indeed, in fact, all the member states have rules to that effect. However, the implementation of these rules differs a lot among the member states. Some of the member states indeed have a very detailed rule in this area, but others, they only have very general provisions. They rely mostly on self-co-regulation, or they only limit this accessibility obligation to public service broadcasters. The overview also showed that indeed the Article 7 of the directive, it's AVMSD directive, it's called the AVMSD directive, was an incentive to introduce the accessibility requirements in 12 member states or reinforce the existing ones in further 15 member states. The report also showed that the subtitling is the most common tool in all the member states, and that the predominance of accessibility requirements it's mostly relevant to public service broadcasters, and only some member states introduced measures as regards on-demand services, which is also a call which is, I will talk about it later also, but it was a call expressed by many respondents to the public consultations to introduce the same rules that exist for linear services, for broadcast, also to on-demand services, because there is at the moment there is a big discrepancy. As regards commercial broadcasters, accessibility requirements constitute a licensing obligation or condition for DTT authorization. Other incentives mentioned by the member states are the financial incentives for film productions, for example, increased rate of support where accessibility versions of films are made, or state aid measures for subtitling of evening news, or in the field of production and broadcasting for hearing impaired people. As regards more detailed information, which on the basis of the study published last year. First, as regards subtitling. So again, as I said before, in fact all the member states provide for subtitling services. What differs at the moment a lot is the quality of subtitling. So this in some of the member states yes, it's still very low, and then even though the obligation and the subtitling services exist, in terms of quality they cannot be compared to other subtitling services in other member states. And in this respect, the best examples are those present in UK and Netherlands, but also Sweden, France, Belgium, Ireland and Finland have quite a good subtitling services. As regards sign language, here the comparison with subtitling is shows that the sign language represent a much lower share of subtitling of accessibility services. Is on average is well below 5% of overall programming. Some countries do not provide for sign language at all, and the higher shares were seen in Portugal, Belgium, UK and Slovakia. Below you will also see the link to the study. If you are not yet aware of the study, this is where you can find the results. But now coming back to the last accessibility service, audio description. This one was programs with audio description are broadcast in 13 member states, and share of overall programming is quite low. So as you can see, average volumes range between 4 and 11% of overall programming. And now I'm coming to the most recent development in this field, this green paper consultations. Again, you can find the link here where you can find the consultation itself, and you can also find, I think, yes, all the replies received so far. So if you are interested in the replies by regulators, member states, network providers, you will find them there on the same web page. There were two questions were posed in the public consultations. The first one was asking, do you think additional standardization efforts are needed in this field? And the second question asked what incentives could be offered to encourage investment in innovative services for people with disabilities. As regards the first question, I don't know, surprisingly or not surprisingly, the majority of respondents said that further standardization efforts are not needed at all, as the standards already exist. The strongest views here belong to network providers, manufacturers, who even thought that the further intervention or further that the standardization should be left to the market itself, and then the further regulation here in this area could even impede innovation. And yes, they had the most, I would say, the categorical or negative approach here. The areas where standards were needed, because also some respondents pointed to the need of further standards were needed with respect to connectivity and APIs, but also a few respondents mentioned the need of further development of standards in the area of web accessibility, quality of different access services, and content recognition and synchronization technologies. The most moderate group said that yes, the standards are not needed as much as rather the implementation of those standards should be improved. So they were pointing rather to the gaps, to the fragmentation and lack of focus in terms of the technologies used or the choice in implementing the standards. So this was considered as a major obstacle or impediment, and not as such the lack of standards in the area. Just as regards other solutions that the respondents pointed in these areas, some respondents, also regulators, mentioned the need for strengthening of the current regulation. They believe that this strengthened harmonization in the fields would also provide for more legal certainty and would provide a level playing field. So this was one of the recommendations that we received in reply to this public consultation. And yes, a few respondents also mentioned that rather than looking at the further standardization need, what's lacking is accessible audiovisual content, so here should be the main focus. They were also pointing to other problems, as like the differences between the obligation placed on broadcasters and OTT providers, or in fact the differences between the regulation in the EU and outside the EU, which also did not provide for a level playing field and was considered as an obstacle. As regards incentives and the question what incentives should be applied, most of the respondents pointed to financial incentives, fiscal incentives. So basically everyone said that due to the high cost of accessibility services, state support is needed. They pointed then to state aid, to tax incentives, meaning tax deduction for companies producing the accessibility service, reduced VAT tax on goods and services, accessible goods and services. Again, the harmonization of legislation was mentioned here, so strengthening of current Article 7. At the moment it only says the member states should encourage, so some respondents thought that it should be this protection should be stronger. It shouldn't be just encouragement but an obligation placed on the member states. Other respondents mentioned the need for that accessibility services, the obligation of accessibility services should be included in must carry. there were also calls on the European Commission to co-finance projects in this area, and what was repeated in many replies was the need to involve all the stakeholders on the value chain, and to the Commission was also called on establishing a global-wide discussions in this area. However, market operators, again network providers mostly, and the manufacturers, the opinion that the best incentive would be not to restrict the ability of platforms to innovate. So again, they rather preferred zero action approach in this area. What other? Also, there was. Many respondents mentioned the role of the European Commission in this area. They mentioned the role of the European research and agenda that could incorporate areas where research, innovation and deployment projects in relation to the accessibility of online audiovisual works for persons with disabilities should be still funded. Yes, I mentioned already the call for the European Forum for discussion in this area. So these were all like the main trends in replies that we received to the public consultation. At the moment we will publish the results, or the summary of results. At the moment the replies as such are published, and at the beginning of next year the European Commission will start a review process of the AVMSD directive, meaning that we will have a look at all the provisions of the directive and discuss with the stakeholders. In fact, those discussions already started, but we will still analyze internally within the Commission and externally on the need to amend or provisions of the directive, including Article 7 of the directive. So, thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. That was an interesting overview. Of course, I did listen very carefully, and I heard that the European Commission wants to get involved all stakeholders. So this is very important, I guess. So it's also a bit what we try to do with the think tank. So perhaps we can put it on a more international level, more European one at least. I think this is very important. I don't know whether there are questions. If not, it is true, it was very clear. José Manuel has one. So just one question, and then I will ask Mia to join. Perhaps you can stay here, because we can discuss.
Okay, so I will move to
the microphone. I think that would be great, because after the regulator, it would be good to have the user point of view. It's not exactly the same, but in the meantime, José Manuel.
Thank you very much, Anna, for the presentation. I have one basic question, which is, I would like to know what is the point of view of the Commission concerning the analysis of the cost-benefit of the implementation of the accessibility services. A lot of people is saying that they should be sustainable somehow. I have seen that in your slides you have written something like must carry.
Yes.
Do you think that the public service concept is something that should be kept independently of the sustainability of the deployment of the services, or the market is so strong that sustainability is crucial?
It's okay, maybe I can answer. Yes, I believe I don't agree with all those replies, because what I was referring to are the replies to the public consultation, not necessarily the views of the Commission. Personally, I do not think that market forces are sufficient here. I believe that still the public support is necessary. I believe that the accessibility services still should benefit from the support from the state budget, and so indeed yes, this is my view.
Yes, I think it's a very tricky question, because if we would like to foster markets, sometimes, especially for public services, really public services, we need regulation to go towards markets step by step. But of course, I think we need to have a real thought about how to get the business models on there, because, well, we have to live.